Hey everybody, Liam Clisham here for another Professionally Incorrect, where I like to do Houdini, C4D, and other types of experiments and pass that information on to you. This project is coming from doing some experimentation on a side project I had going on, doing some organic growths and morphs and things like that, and it's stuff I've done quite a bit before with like particles to VDBs and changing the particles and morphing those, and then it kind of comes across through the VDBs. But after doing some deep dives on like OD Force and some other places, started to hear about VDB morphing and came up with this through combined efforts of websites and YouTube and things like that. And yeah, it led me down to this road of, wow, this is really fun. I don't know if more people know about how powerful this can be for certain applications. So we're going to eventually get to this. This is kind of like the main setup here. I'll also talk about going from like pighead to a squab and like more complex objects, and then also transferring UVs towards the end. But this is like the base setup here. But if you are new to Houdini and kind of not really understanding what I'm talking about, don't worry, I'm going to start a little bit fresh and basic here and talk about my process of getting to where I got with this. Just a forewarning, though, I am going to expect that you have some experience in Houdini. I'm not going to break down a match size step by step, what a transform is, things like that. I'll just gloss over them. This is mostly going to be focused on this VDB Morph SDF. If you would like a more in-depth tutorial, let me know. Just leave a comment below and I can record a second part that's a little bit longer and breaks down all the additional stuff. So, if you've been in Houdini for, I don't know, probably more than a month, you've probably seen VDBs, which are volumes. And we've got surface or distance VDBs and then volume VDBs. So like fog and surface. They're really good for organic shapes, and if you've got, say, really terrible CAD geometry coming in that, say, quad remesher isn't really working well, or if you're coming from C4D or ZBrush and the Z remesher is kind of getting it but not great, or like leaving out details, using an SDF is awesome. It can get a little bit slow and like really high density meshes, and you can remesh that high density mesh and keep a lot of the detail. But they're just super powerful, and so I'm gonna expect that you've kind of messed around with them. But if you're not familiar with them, definitely look them up. They're really cool. So I've got two different ones going here. I've got like this sphere one, and then I guess we'll call it a box. It's not quite fully a box, it's more of a rectangular box. And what initially started was, how do I take a object, let's say, I don't know, a shark. Let's say I'm working with a shark model, and I turn it into a similar shark but slightly different. And I want to do it organically over time and kind of like a nice transform throughout. So VDB combines are a lot like booleans, if you've ever used those inside Houdini or C4D, where you can combine two different VDBs in the same way that you would with a boolean. What I'm doing with this transform is just scaling it. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that back on so we can see. So this SDF union is combining the two. I do intersections where it just kind of cuts it out there. Difference takes the difference between the two, so on and so forth. There's other ones in here, but these ones are specific to SDF. And so with this animation, I can kind of get what I want, you know, like I've got this sphere here, and I could do like a transition like this, and then maybe I could set up multiple ones that are offset, but it's not quite an organic morph that I was going for. So if I turn this back to union and maybe try and smooth it like so with a Gaussian, kind of gets there. See, like it's kind of growing into the shape, but doesn't quite get there. And maybe I could like fake the iterations coming down, but it's really not great. So I was going to a different conclusion, I guess is the best way to put it, of using points to VDBs. And just for the sake of doing that, let's say I scatter some points here on this, and then do particles, or VDB from particles, like so, points, and we'll just go ahead and go down to like 0.1, scale these down. You can see we get these points in here, and then could also, I'll just copy this over by holding Alt and dragging, throw smooth on there. So yeah, you can start to manipulate these things. So imagine deleting some of these points out, and you can get like an organic transition. And then if I was doing that to another shape and then doing a VDB combine, kind of start to get this organic morph, but it still has limitations to it. So that's what led me down this path here. So taking a look at ODForce and YouTube and various places, I came across the VDB Morph SDF. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this off so we can see what's happening better. But on the left input, you're taking your base mesh, and then on the right, you're taking the mesh that you want to have happen and morphing between it, like so. This is basically what I want. I've done a little bit of modification to this where I've keyframed this time step. I think by default, I'll throw this down, but it's got like something divided by frame. Let's go ahead and take a look what this is. Yeah, it's 1 divided by the frames per second in here. And it gets a little bit slow, and I just found that it's not as easy to manipulate and get things where you want them to be and the time frame that you want them to be. So I recommend just clearing that out and keyframing it however you want, and if you're just going to stick to this. So got this set up, but it's kind of bland, right? Like it's just going from this to this, and that works. Like that's kind of cool, but I was expecting a little bit more control. Like I want to take it from this area here, and if you're used to like mops or fields in Cinema 4D, and now with attribute float adjusts and all the other adjusts that are inside Houdini, you can kind of control a lot of this with those, but I couldn't really find a way to do that on anything that I was looking at online. So I started diving into it, found out this little port right here, and you can see it down at the bottom, is optional VDB alpha mask, and that controls the transition element that we see here with this one, and how we kind of go from bottom to top with some like noise in there and so on and so forth. So we will talk about that in just a minute after we go into the next layer of this tutorial. So messing around with it, and came to find that it gets pretty slow with heavy geometry, or even like not so heavy geometry. And I'm saying geometry, but like voxel size here and density, it just is really slow at the base level. So got this pig head, it's not really high detailed. Same here with this box. And if I click on this, again, keyframed here. Actually, am I not doing, oh nope, I'm doing frame divided by 2. So I was messing around with that too. So you can put that in there as well. But you can see like this is pretty heavy and just chugging along, taking its time, and I started to feel like this is going to be a bust, because the detail that I was needing was way higher. I needed like sharp edges, needed everything to come through. So if I'm pumping this up to say 0.01 or 0.001, excuse me, to really bring out that detail, just thinking about now, probably went too far. I'll just escape out of that. Let's try without crashing. We can do it. 0.005. think that will be okay without it completely destroying itself. Okay, so there you go. Yeah, there's some like faceting in here and stuff. We could fix that with the smooth, but like this is what I was going for. I needed these details in here to be coming out. So didn't know what to do to move along faster. And I'm going to throw a shout out to Tyler Bay right now, where after doing research, found a tutorial, and I'll put it up here in the little bloop bloop drop down thing that happens in the corner, where he figured out that if you take a morph and throw it in a solver, it works a lot better. So this is definitely a shout out to him for this technique here. So that's why I've got a solver set up in this instance here. If we come in, it's not much different. It still just has a basic VDB morph, but we're taking the previous frame and we're merging it with this second input here, which is our object 2B. And it's essentially just going to take the previous frame and hold that information and morph it at a rate of, I guess, quarter a second is the way that I figured this out. So if I put it at 1, it'll go to 24 steps. And then if I go down to half, it's actually about 48, 0.25, 72, so on and so forth. So not manually controlling it this time, just setting the time step to control the speed here. And go watch Tyler's video. He talks about it way better than I'm able to talk about it right now. But that's basically the mechanics here. And if I jump back out and hit play, you'll see it is way faster. Just like, what I don't really understand why it's so much different. I don't know what's happening behind the scenes of the VDB Morph. I haven't looked into it. But it doesn't seem like it should work that way. The way Tyler explains it is that with the morph, it's holding on to the voxel data every single time it's going to morph further and further, while in the solver, it's just looking at the last frame to get that. So I guess that makes sense. It's not holding all the voxel data, it's just looking at the previous one, so less stuff in memory, and overall makes it faster. Tyler, if I'm wrong, leave me a comment below, but I think that's how you explained it in your video. So that's great. Really speeds up the workflow, started getting to what I wanted, and then I got the idea, all right, maybe if I throw this transform in here, I can get it to do what I want, and almost, like, it's starting to do stuff that I want, but it's really weird. And like I said, I eventually found out that we can use this port here for the mask. So let's go ahead and take a look at that in the next one. All right, so this is where it gets really fun. I've got a note in here that we'll talk about in a second, that the transitional volume must enclose both the shapes completely. So keep that in the back of your mind as we're taking a look at this. So pretty much the same setup over here. Making sure I don't have ghosts on. Cool. Pig 0.02, box 0.02. Generally try and keep these the same. I have found that if the density for the transitioning, the element 2B, I guess is the best way to put it, is lower or higher, higher density than the base geometry coming in, it really tends to slow things down. Also, the volume controlling the mask tends to play a big part of it too. So kind of a balancing act. Seems like if we keep these two the same, that's like the biggest speed hurdle, and then a little bit with the density here for the mask that we'll talk about in a second. So just wanted to talk about that before you start running in and setting voxel size density really high and extreme. Play with it a little bit, inch down a little bit before going into it. So here we go. We got that and this, and over here we've got a volume. And so what's happening here is this mask down here has to use a volume, a fog volume instead of an SDF volume as the mask. So I'm just taking this pig head and this box and then basically duplicating what's happening here over here, but instead of scaling to fit like we do with the original box, so it's like really nice and tight to the shape of here, I'm saying to not use uniform scale. The reason that is, and I can show it ahead, but the pig nose and some of the ears didn't fully get transitioned. And that's what this note here is about. So if I turn this back on, and I'll show it now, you'll see as we go forward, a little bit of the nose is going to stick out here, a little bit of the ears on the side is going to completely transition like right there. So whatever you're using as your mask must enclose both objects. That seems to work the best. We'll take a look at the squab pig transition in a little bit, and it gets a little bit weird too doing it that way. Gotta figure out your timings for things, but that seems to be the only way that allows for both objects to fully transition between each other. So that's what this note is here. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and set this back to non-uniform scale like so, and then we're converting it to fog density here, and this seems like a good voxel size. I haven't gone lower than this for any of my experiments, and it just seems to be like a good balance. Mileage may vary, but definitely try it out. All right, so the next thing that I'm doing, and I'm going to go ahead and turn this off, is I'm just adding a curl noise. I'm lazy. I don't really feel like going into VOPs. I could type a couple lines of Vex and build my own version of this for sure, but why? We've got this volume velocity SOP that will just take care of it for you. So that's all this is doing here, is just kind of setting up like a nicer organic feel to the transition that we're building out. And also, like the mask that happens here, you can mask stuff as well in this volume velocity. So we've got some nice chunks taken out there, but I wanted even more organic feelings and chunks in there. So I added this curl noise, and that's just moving along, eating out some of this as the transition's going. So this first one here, if I turn this off again, I'm not making it time dependent, it just kind of sits there. And the second one comes in and is time dependent and eats through some of this at various intervals. So next, I've got something here called normalize fog. I find this works best as you're trying to build transitional elements. If you take a look between the two, this one, the whites are a lot whiter, and then some of the gray areas end up falling back as we go in here, like so. So we're just saying, take any of the density that's coming out of here and set it between 0 to 1. So any manipulation that we do forward is a float value and much easier to control than having weird outliers where like, okay, this corner goes above 1, and then as we're making our transition, it doesn't actually fully take because it doesn't subtract right or add in right or multiply right, so on and so forth. So really great idea to just always normalize your stuff before you start manipulating it and doing transitions and things. So simply put, taking this here because there's no way to normalize it, and normalizing it here. Moving on, using the exact same SOP, this volume adjust fog, I'm subtracting out some of the area and building a nice little transition. So there's lots of ways to do this. I actually have a tutorial from a month or so ago talking about these and how to use them to do some like organic eating away stuff at text that I was messing around with, which in hindsight kind of led to me finding some of this here. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, I'm just taking a subtract operation on the density using a line, which we've also got radio, bounding box, and some other stuff, and slowly building this back on. So if I come over here and hit enter, you can see that I've got this start position and end position. The end position's way up here just so I kind of have some nicer fall off. You can control it with the remap. I was having some trouble getting it exactly how I wanted it to feel for the transition, so I just scooted this up until I got it right where I wanted, and then the start position starts down here, slowly comes back up and adds stuff back in. You might be thinking, well, why didn't you set it to add? This is just how my brain works. I like to know that, okay, I have started by subtracting it, and then moving this up brings stuff back in. But you can totally do an add, and it would just be the reverse process of this. Down here, I'm normalizing again just to be safe, mostly because I'm working with values that are -1 to +1 up here. I don't want any weird outliers, so again, just normalizing it to 0 to 1 so there aren't any -1s in there, or absurd values that go above 1, which shouldn't happen. Since you're subtracting 1 from 1, it would just go down to 0, but there is a possibility that you would get some -1s in there. So yeah, that's that. So just for the sake of trying it out, I thought, okay, maybe this would be faster with the transitional element and I won't need a solver anymore. Sadly, that's not true. It's still heavy. Once we get to about here, still keeping all that data in the memory and not any faster. So Tyler Bay's technique to save the day, again, piping this into this third input here, and just like we did before, but instead of previous frame, input number 2, and leaving it like that, we've got input 3 here coming in like so, and just the time step of 1. I talked about this before. 1 is basically 1 second of time, half is 2 seconds, quarter 3 seconds, so on and so forth. So if I go back down to 0.5 here, jump back up, you'll see it goes a little bit slower. I find trying to keep it at 1 so it keeps pace with whatever your transition is best practice for this. But sometimes you might want to extend it a little bit or speed it up, I guess. I don't know how you could move ahead in time faster than the transition is moving. I didn't really try that, but maybe you can. Maybe this thing is mystical and I can look into the future. But yeah, this is my experience with it. Is 1 is basically by 24 frames, 30 frames, whatever you're doing, and so on and so forth, which I've already explained. So I'm gonna go ahead and set this back to 1. But that's it. This is where we were at the beginning of the tutorial. Basically built this setup and can now transition between 2 different elements. I've kind of covered what you need to do of having the transitional volume be as big or bigger so it can encompass everything that's going on. So if you want, you can stop here and go experiment. If you want to learn more, let's go take a deeper dive about what I was talking about with these transitional elements, and then also how to get some UVs over, which I don't know that I'm doing right, to be honest. So as we look at UVs, if somebody has a better technique, let me know, but it worked for me, and that's all that matters, like I said at the beginning. So, have this pig going to squab, which I just accidentally clicked ahead to 27, so we'll just let it run for a second. But you'll see I set up a bound here, and that's pulling in this merge from both these match sizes to get a full bounding box around everything. And looking at it, looks like right here there might actually be something sticking out, and right around there as well, but I think I haven't had any issues with it, so I think we're okay. But let's say I wanted to use this as my transitional element, this little box, and it's like, all right, cool, this will be nice and fast, and we've got our same setup from before, normalizing it, transition, etc., and just for the sake of see it's down there. You might think, okay, like I'm going to use this as the mask, maybe it will spread it out to everywhere else. Does not happen. Turn this back off, turn the solver back on, and you'll see does the transition right in this area only. Just kind of bloop. And I've also tried turning turning one object into a VDB, like we've got here, but to a fog, and using that instead. And I've tried doing the base one instead as well. Nothing seems to work. You kind of got to think about it too, where with these, if I turn this merge back on, if you're in Photoshop, imagine Photoshop, and we're looking at this, and this is your composition in Photoshop, and you're masking stuff out or erasing stuff out. We're saying we want to add everything back in where the fog is. So that mask is saying add in or transition into these areas. So if these areas aren't active or have any volume around them, then it's not going to know that it needs to morph into these areas as well. So it makes sense. Just kind of a bummer that it can't work with smaller and then no to interpolate up higher just to save speed and time and volumes and all that. It's really not that big of a speed hurdle, but that's the reason why this is doing what it's doing. So yeah, same thing. Got two different curl noises interacting with each other, normalizing it, doing the transition like so, and you'll see I'm starting in the middle here. And the reason that is another little gotcha is that if I start this at say -2 down here, this doesn't really begin to transition until it gets up into this area. So hit play, you can see like there's a little bit of movement, and now it's finally starting to go, and that's because this has crossed that threshold here. So if we come back, it's only down in these areas, and it's kind of like tickling the bottom of the pig there, as it, even though it's already covering the squab, but it really has to engage with both sections before it makes that transitional element. So just watch this come through here, and it'll build on. And this is the other like kind of thing you got to play with too, is when you're using two objects that are completely different, you might get some gaps like this, because this is starting to fill up here, and the pig is remaining up there, but it's not actually moving points down here. It's moving the voxels and filling in these areas down here. So it's something to keep in mind, is you might need to play with it. I would say you might even want to do like a combination of like a point deform of some sort plus this technique to bring it down into these areas a little bit smoother. Definitely something to play with. I'm not going to cover that here, but just kind of a gotcha. We want to have stuff lined up as close as possible so the transitions work well with each other. You might want to start from the top and the bottom here, so this starts transitioning and the middle and bottom parts start transitioning at the same time, so it's a little bit more fluid. Like I said, I'm not going to go into it tonight, but you might get gaps like that depending on your setup. Regardless, still fun, and you'll see that it continues to transform and morph even after the pig is gone, because it wants to fill in all these areas that have been missing. So it'll just keep going even though your transition has already completed up here. Its goal is to fill in all those details. So just keep that in mind as you're working with stuff. All right, lastly, what if we want to texture stuff and move it over and have, say, the textures from the pig come over and be on the squab? I unfortunately cannot do this justice enough by bringing the material over. I have tried pulling the ShopNet out of here and pulling the textures and finding the textures. Just having a hard time finding the base textures because they are linked in a way that has this shorthand to find them, and just not quite getting there. So we're just going to look at the UV and trust that it works. I will show an attribute with a map on it afterwards with some brick to show that it does work. It's going to be pretty low res, but I have used this on a project, and it truly does carry the UVs over. So same setup that we've done before. Exactly the same. We're taking this pig and transitioning to the squab. I'm not going to let the whole thing run. There's two ways that I have found that work. One is way more accurate, but a good bit slower. The new Labs UV transfer tool is awesome. It takes care of seams and all of that, which we'll see right here. The other thing is it does carry over the color information as well. So you can get a preview of saying like, this does morph properly, but it is pretty slow, which you just saw. It clicked and it's like, loading and loading. But gets rid of seams, which is awesome. So I would recommend doing this if you are working with very particular or product shots or things like that where you really can't have seams and stuff. However, if you can do like a triplanar and get away with it, attribute transfer is a lot faster. However, looking over here, see we got like this weird jankiness that happens there, some in these areas. It's really close. It does look crappy if you're not using triplanar or something similar to kind of hide these weird wobbly seams that happen, but it gets most of the way there. And you'll see, like, if I just click, it works. And if we were to play it out even further, you can kind of play the sim and the transfer at the same time. Do not recommend with the UV transfer. I've tried pumping up like the tolerance for both of these, and it is slow, but it's doing its job. Under the hood, if you really want to take a look, because I wanted to see, is it doing a solver or something? It is a for loop in a for loop, and it's doing like prim UV transfer type stuff too. It looks like, I might be wrong, but it looks like parameter UV, and I'm not super great with Vex. I know enough to get the job done, but that's what it looks like it's doing here for the most part. Please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below, but kind of just was clicking around to see what exactly is happening. And look, there's even an attribute transfer right here. And shop material path is in there, which is interesting. They must have a lot of people on the labs team that do the shop stuff and put it in here by default. So that's interesting. I didn't know that. But yeah, feel free to look inside yourself. If it's locked for you, just come down and let's see. You'll have this. No, you won't. I'll just add a new one. Labs UV transfer. And right click, come down, and then allow editing contents, and you can hop in there and see how they built it and all of that. Very accurate, does a great job, just slow. So down here, just to show the difference, I'm deleting everything out for shop material name, parameter, keeping all the UV stuff, and you can see this just looks way better than the UV transfer here that gets like and weird. However, you might be able to save the day with UV, or not UV, triplanar texturing. I've seen it work wonders. So yeah, that's that. Nice and simple. Do your solver, convert it to a mesh, do attribute transfer. You don't even need to check anything else. It's just going to go ahead and pick up the UV right there automatically once that's turned on. And then, yeah, you're good to go. And then this is just a brick texture popped in here. And you can see it's got some wonkiness in some of the areas here. If I had a higher res mesh, this would show up pretty nice, but you would definitely see like these little things right in there that don't look great. But like, I don't know, depending on how far away you are, it's not too bad. Can't quite pick up on it. So yeah, that is that. Just to reiterate what the steps were, in the basic transition and how you're going to get to most of your other setups is left side coming in to the solver here, right side coming in to your second input, then your transitional element over here. So base geometry, convert that to an SDF. The lower the voxel size, the nicer the mesh is going to look, or the crisper it's going to look. I shouldn't say nicer, but you'll definitely get more details out of it depending on the situation. And try and match these up. It seems to work a lot better. I've definitely noticed that the right side, if you up this, really slows down stuff. So try and keep these 1:1, and same with this. Try and keep this around the same voxel density as the other two. However, been finding that right around 0.025 is pretty good. Then you can manipulate it however you want. If you want to do some curl noise, or don't even need to do that, just normalize it and do a straight transition, you can do that there. Pop it in the solver, and then inside here, we've got your previous frame coming into this port here, your second input right there, and then your mask coming into the third for the morph right in there. And you're going to control your time right in that area. One thing, if you've stayed all the way through the video, thank you, because you're going to learn a tip too. This renormalization is kind of just quality stuff. Tyler goes over it in his video. Again, I'll put a link in the description below. But less steps, less quality, more steps, more quality. Spatial and temporal schemes also are going to be different ways that it calculates this stuff and have different types of quality. Leaving it at the defaults seems pretty fine for most instances in what I've encountered. All right, that is it. As always, if you have questions, comment below. Find me anywhere on social media just by searching for Liam Clisham. And yeah, thanks for staying till the end. I don't know when I'm going to do another one of these because I kind of just throw them up whenever I feel like it, but I appreciate everyone that's subscribed and comes along for the ride. So I'll see you next time.